Today we're here at the Cancer Centre in Christchurch. In a moment I'll get Dr Nzherald to say a little bit more about why we're here today and also a few health-related highlights from the campaign trail for today. But I do want to acknowledge the release today of the pre-election fiscal update. What it does show is that the New Zealand economy is turning the corner after a rough period of time. Economic growth is returning, the government's books are heading back into surplus, and we're winning the battle against inflation. The forecasts are showing that unemployment will remain low, and there is real reason for optimism about the future of the New Zealand economy, and I think the pre-election fiscal update shows that. The government's careful management of the government finances does see us returning back into surplus, albeit a year later than we had previously been expecting. That is an indication of the difficult economic period that we have been in just right about now, where we've seen tax revenue declining. But the decisions that we've taken have guaranteed or have ensured that we're getting back into surplus again within the forecast period, which is what one of our fiscal rules is. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with the picture that the pre-election fiscal update is showing. I'm going to hand over to Dr Nzherald to make a few words on health, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It's a pleasure to be here at the Christchurch Cancer Centre, where the Cancer Society has opened this home away from home for patients receiving care in Christchurch, where they have to travel to the centre here. This is supported by a government shovel-ready project, so it's fabulous to see the building open and being able to serve patients and their whānau. An important day for cancer control in New Zealand. Today we rolled out HPV testing for cervical cancer, which is a much more convenient test that we know will close the gaps when it comes to equity for cancer outcomes in New Zealand, because it's a much more acceptable test for many women to have. And Labor today has committed to making that test free for everyone should we be returned to government. Prevention is at the heart of Labor's cancer policies. That's why we've already introduced world-leading tobacco control legislation. We're also supporting an IT upgrade for the breast cancer screening program, so women don't fall through the cracks and get called back for screening there. And in addition, we've rolled out bowel cancer screening nationwide. It was only a pilot when we came into government. Many activists in the Cancer Society have also been pushing for lung cancer screening, and a pilot of that is underway in Auckland as well. Labor's track record in health is one of substantial investment, including a 40% increase for Pharmac funding, which of course funds medicines for everyone, including cancer patients. We've also invested heavily in infrastructure, including having 7 new linear accelerators open around the country. I want to return to the issue that is a big one for many people with cancer, that of having to have care away from home. And that is something that we're working to make sure that people have more care in their communities near where they live. And part of that has been the work we've done while in government to set up infusion centres, actually in some rural and provincial centres. For example, I visited one in Oamaru last week, but there's also others in Timaru, in Rotorua, in Tākaka even. So while centres like this are incredibly necessary and do an excellent job, we're pushing into a future for care where we are offering more services near where people live. Thank you very much.
Right. Prime Minister, how much responsibility do you take for Labor tanking in the polls?
As I indicated this morning, I'm the leader of the Labor Party. Of course, I accept responsibility for that. We've got 5 weeks to go in this campaign. We're going to be out there working hard to win every vote that we can.
You also accepted to change that polling and give yourself a real shot?
Just watch me.
You also accepted that there is a mood for change. How do you win an election when there is a mood for change?
Because we are also offering change. As you saw from the pre-election fiscal update today, the New Zealand economy is turning the corner. It's been a really rough period for New Zealanders, but there's a lot of reason for optimism. I said when I became Prime Minister that I wanted to refocus the government on getting back to basics, that we were going to focus on issues like the cost of living. The inflation coming down shows that we're starting to win that battle. We've got a range of practical targeted measures that are going to make a difference to New Zealand families, like making dental care free for the under 30s, with a plan to roll it out further in future terms of government, like taking GST off fruit and vegetables, like making prescriptions free. And we saw from the visit that we had in the pharmacy this morning just what a difference that is making to so many New Zealand families. Now is not the time to turn back, it's a time to make further progress.
The polls clearly show, though, that people aren't interested in those policies. They aren't interested in labelling.
Look, forecasts can be wrong. We've got 5 weeks of campaigning ahead of us. We're going to be working hard to win every single vote that we can.
You're going to need a miracle, aren't you?
We're going to need a good campaign, and we're going to have one.
What made you rethink your current strategy in any way?
Look, as I've said, we've been focused on getting back to discussing the basics of the issues that are facing New Zealanders. That's what we're going to continue to focus on.
Phillips, and he's in that poll just passed you in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. I mean, are there any kind of weaknesses of his that you'd be looking to exploit in the next?
Well, I believe it was a draw, but there's still plenty of campaigning ahead.
Is your dental policy enough to win over some voters, do you think?
We certainly understand that New Zealanders. The feedback that we've had is that New Zealanders are very receptive to the free dental care policy. I'm really proud of it. I think it is a step change for our overall approach to New Zealanders' health. We know that if we get in earlier, we can stop more complex health problems emerging because of poor dental.
Just before, when I asked you about how do you change the poll results and give yourself a real shot, you said just watch me. Do you have any big bang policies left up your sleeve that you can play?
We've got some further policies still to announce, but I'm not going to announce them all now.
Do you need a Hail Mary to win the election?
I think what we're going to need is a good campaign, and that's what you're going to see from us.
When will the cost of living crisis be over?
When we get inflation back down, when we see wages growing faster than inflation, which is what the Treasury are now forecasting, and when we see New Zealand families able to get ahead.
Can Labor win the election given the short-term economic gloom continues?
That's not what the Treasury's pre-election fiscal update is showing.
On preview, you said it's better than expected, but it's still incredibly tight. And can you commit in the next term to staying within what you've forecast in terms of spending? Basically, it's saying you can't spend anything more than you've forecast.
What you'll see when we release our overall campaign commitments, so we will release a fiscal plan as part of that, which will build off the pre-election fiscal update. You'll see that our promises are relatively modest, that they all add up, that the costings of them are accurate, that we've got a plan for how to pay for them. That's certainly not something the National Party can claim at this point, because what are we now, 14, 15 days after they've announced their tax plan, all of the numbers have fallen apart, and they still won't share with New Zealanders what they're going to cut or how they're going to pay for the massive hole that they've got on their financial plans.
And what's your message to people doing it tough over the next wee while, that they're basically at the moment can't afford any kind of tax relief, and why not look at something like the wealth tax to provide a new source of revenue? We
are winning the battle against inflation. Big tax cuts now will keep inflation higher for longer. That's effectively what the National Party are proposing. They are proposing a plan that will see inflation staying higher for longer. We've got to get inflation back down and make sure wages are growing. That is how we're going to help Kiwi families to get ahead. National's plan for tax cuts, lower wage growth, and higher inflation isn't going to help Kiwi families to get ahead.
The Greens say a wealth tax is the answer here, and then that will allow you to then redistribute wealth better. Why not look into that?
As I've indicated, there are too many risks associated with a wealth tax. We did look at it. I wasn't convinced that the risks outweighed, that the benefits outweighed the risks.
You've previously criticised National for an economic rebound driven by migration. That's exactly what Treasury is forecasting.
No, if you look at the per capita growth figures, they're certainly better than they were at the time that I would have made those comments.
We've seen record migration, though, Prime Minister, 96,000 in last year. That's got to be having an impact on the economy, doesn't it?
We saw a spike in migration after the borders reopened following the global pandemic, where we were basically isolated from the rest of the world for the better part of 2.5 years. I think everybody would have expected to see that. There was an outflow of people who wanted to get out and travel, and there was an inflow of people who wanted to come home, including the fact that we were focused on bringing in some skills that we were short of. We've seen that cooling already. So we're certainly not seeing, month by month, we're certainly not seeing the figures that we were seeing in that first period after the borders reopened. We're returning to more normal patterns.
Today you announced policy on migration. Do you think there should be a cap on numbers, and if so, what would that cap be?
I'm not announcing our immigration policy today, but what I would say is, which was what we've been saying all along, that we've got to make sure that our population is growing sustainably, so we're keeping up with that in terms of infrastructure, in terms of housing and so on, and that also we are bringing into the country the skilled workers that we need, recognising that, to train more doctors, to train more teachers, to train more nurses, that takes time, and we have an immediate need. So being able to bring those skilled workers in across the border is one of the ways that we can plug the skills gaps in the meantime.
National Inactive said the state of the books is a product of Labor's economic mismanagement. What would you respond to that?
Well, I'd almost agree with that, because the state of the books is actually very strong compared to what they could have been. We are getting the books back into surplus. We've got one of the lowest levels of debt in the world, and those are things that I am very proud of.
Today you announced free screening to be funded from within existing budgets for cervical cancer, which kills 60 people a year. Where is your policy and extra spending to expand screening for bowel cancer, which kills 3,000 people a year?
I'll hand over to Dr. Verrill to provide some further details on today's announcement, bearing in mind that there's more health announcements still to come.
Thank you. So we have already rolled out a bowel cancer screening program where there was none over the last 5 years. Work is underway to see if that can safely be extended. But of course we take a balanced view and have to look across a number of different cancers when we make these decisions. I take your point about deaths, but cervical cancer also causes a huge amount of harm, need for return care, difficulties having a family in some cases.
Have you spoken to the Dental Association about its concerns with Labor's dental policy costings?
Yes, I have, and that was a very constructive discussion. We went over the amounts that we had budgeted for older age cohorts. It was apparent that there is substantial room for a change in how the combined dental agreement is run, should we be able to, in a position to implement that policy.
So all of its concerns have been addressed? Case closed?
Yes, I think so. We know that we still have to work together to get that agreement right, and that would be the normal way we would negotiate a contract in government.
Prime Minister, a couple of years ago you were COVID-19 response minister. You were in front of television screens every day, 1 o'clock presses with Dr. Bloomfield, behind Spread Your Legs meme. With these latest preferred Prime Minister numbers, where has the popularity gone, do you think?
Look, ultimately no one's voted yet. We've still got 5 weeks of election campaigning ahead of us. I'm going to be out there working very hard every minute of every day to win New Zealanders' trust and confidence so that we can continue to do the work that we are doing.
Does it hurt seeing those popularity numbers drift away with almost every poll?
Ultimately, politics can be a tough business sometimes. But we've still got a campaign ahead of us. I'm going to be getting out there working hard and making sure that we're in the best possible position that we could be in to form government after the election.
Do you think taking on the leadership in January, were you taking on a poison chalice? I think so.
I don't think that's quite the right phrase that you're looking for.
You get what I mean? Were you taking on a... Yeah. You get what I mean.
I acknowledged when I took on the job that there was a job ahead of us to support New Zealand through a really difficult time, and that was before the cyclone and the flooding happened. So we've had a tough start to the year, and I don't think anyone would diminish that. But I'm very optimistic about the country's future, and I'm enjoying being out on the campaign trail and able to talk to New Zealanders about that.
A couple of people you walked past in the markets today kind of remarked about how you took on a lot of responsibility and took on the government when in a bad state. What do you think of those concerns?
Ultimately, being the leader of a country isn't just about enjoying the good times. Sometimes there are challenging moments, and you have to dig deep during those times. Leading the country through the COVID-19 response was certainly not easy. There were certainly plenty of sleepless nights during that time, and I don't give up.
No, but I mean, when you became Prime Minister, did you take on and start leading a sinking ship?
No.
Yeah, just in terms of, you've mentioned before that Luxon's had a kind of a long time in terms of campaigning. You've only just started in the last week or so. How are you finding that? Are you comfortable out there in the campaign mode, or are you learning as you go? Can you talk us through your feelings there?
Oh, look, I think, with any campaign, when you've hit the campaign trail full time, there'll be the odd teething issue to work your way through. I'm feeling pretty buoyant and positive about our campaign. We've been very well received around the country. When people hear about the policies that we're promoting, when they hear about the risks of a National Act New Zealand First government, they are much more likely to switch back to voting Labour. So that means that we've got everything to campaign for in the next 5 weeks.
And how do you find those experiences today? And the gelato scooping and choosing a second cheese pie.
Look, I accept that in these things, you want a bit of colour and a bit of fun in a campaign. I'm certainly out there enjoying myself at the moment as well. But I also hope that during the campaign we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about substantive matters too. Because at the end of the day, New Zealanders, we are asking them to make informed decisions about how they vote, and I hope that we will give as much time to talking about those issues as we do to talking about the other things that happen around the periphery of an election campaign.
And you drew with Luxon in the scooping competition. Should we read into that in any way?
I think I'll do some more work on my scooping technique.
Has it taken some getting used to doing those kind of weird campaign things?
Every day as Prime Minister is different. Some days you get to do things that are fun and, you can have a bit of a laugh and you can enjoy yourself. Other days the decisions that you take are bloody hard. And that is the nature of the job, and you have to just take each day as it comes.
Prime Minister, just lastly, when you first saw last night's poll, what was the first word that came to mind?
I wouldn't necessarily give it a single word, but I'd say, hard work is required.
We're celebrating a cancer care facility here, built somewhat with public money, when the Cancer Society says it's using motels for people in Otago and Southland who are up here getting their treatment. When can people like those people in Otago and Southland expect to be treated in their own area? Within the first term of a next Labour government?
The solution for Otago Southland's cancer radiation oncology service is to make sure that we secure the recruitment that Te Whatuora is working on as an area of high priority. That'll be achieved through locums, and yes, in the first term. Secondly, there needs to be there is already work underway on a more coordinated national approach to radiation oncology so that service sustainability is maintained across the country.
Things are, you expect things to get better when you've been in power for 6 years. Why are things seemingly getting worse in health?
I don't accept that things are getting worse in health. We have come through a pandemic with exceptional results in terms of how many of our people we kept alive. We kept our healthcare workers alive. And globally, 100,000 healthcare workers died. We have had to reverse a lot of underfunding in health. That's why we increased Pharmac funding by 40% over the time we've been in government. Everyone seems to have forgotten about the 3 years that the Pharmac budget was frozen before we came into government. We've had to address capital infrastructure when there were 2 years where the national government contributed nothing to capital infrastructure. That's malpractice when you're running a health system. We have had to build up our workforce. We've had 2,000 extra doctors, 5,000 extra nurses. I understand that it is not yet enough. So that's why we have to keep going. And one final point about health funding. The issue that the Prime Minister has talked today about pre-fu and responsible calculations of our promises is one we take very seriously, because if you get that wrong, the health system will be underfunded. And that's what we had in the last term of government. I noticed National was saying exactly the same thing they said when they were last campaigning to become government. They're saying they'll raise health spending every year. But that doesn't mean they'll meet inflation. And that is the challenge that we need to be able to sustain, much less grow, our health system has done. I think Labour has a very strong track record on those issues.
How's the Labour caucus feeling after last night's poll numbers? You lose almost 30 MPs on those numbers.
Very resolved.
All right. Just a quick question from Te Karere. The seat of Te Tai Tonga, what's Labour done for Maori in that seat in the last 6 years?
Same as right the way around the country. We've been really focused on issues that concern our Maori communities, which are very similar to the issues that concern the rest of New Zealand. Maori families are focused on cost of living as well. But we've had some specific initiatives in this area around housing, for example, making sure we're working with iwi to build more social houses and supporting iwi aspirations when it comes to housing. Working with iwi and Māori across the country on natural resource management and on environmental issues where we know Māori have a real interest and a real passion towards working with government, and we'll continue to do that. We've been really focused on Māori education and making sure that we're growing the opportunity for Māori to learn in Māori. So if you look at the expansion of kura kaupapa, ko hangareo, the work that we're doing with wānanga to expand that provision, we're making progress there. Now, it is nowhere near job done. That's why we've got to keep the momentum up.
And how effective has Reno been?
Reno's been a hugely effective advocate for Te Tai Tonga, but he's also been a really important member of our team. And I know that as Minister for State, with focus on trade and export growth, he's been really focused on helping to grow the Māori economy. That's a job that I gave him, so he's only a few months into it. But already he's been really focused on how he can support iwi and Māori business to expand their trading opportunities internationally. I actually think that's something that we shouldn't understate. The growing strength of the Māori economy within New Zealand is a really exciting opportunity for New Zealand's future. If I look at how our Māori businesses are doing in terms of their exports and the potential for growth in that area, I think there should be real excitement about that. In the treaty, post-treaty settlement space, there's a lot of iwi start to really make the most of the assets that they're building up through that process, in addition to assets that they themselves have been building up. I think there's real reason for optimism, and ministers like Reno Tirakatini are really helping to grow that.
And could you see him in Cabinet after the election if Labour wins government?
I am 100% focused on winning the election. I'm certainly not counting any chickens before they hatch. We've got to focus on winning government. I know other people seem to be measuring up the beehive for new curtains already. I think that's very premature.
Can I just check that MPs around you, you're feeling resolved?
Absolutely.
Are any of you worried?
We've got a lot of work to do, as the Prime Minister said, but we're determined to do it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Got yours.